líder local en IXDA London y formador de diseñadores. Un gran aplauso para él.
Hola. ¿Cómo estás? The slow clicker. Happy Halloween. I'm sorry, I'm an obstruction to Halloween parties. I was in a cab walking across Melogin, going across Melogin, and I saw everyone all dressed up already, so I think there's going to be a bit of a big party tonight. This is another Jason. I am going to be kind of referring to masks in the metaphor, but I won't be scaring you too much, although some things might get a little bit emotional, for me at least anyway, so please bear with me. And this isn't my poor typography. This is a new font that you can get called Helvetica with 2 L's. Hopefully the rest looks a bit better than that. Right. It's good to pause with the delays because then we can get some good translation. So it's amazing to be here in Melogin, an honor to be back at the Interaction Latin America Conference, and a huge honor to be one of the last speakers of today. I had the most amazing trip on Tuesday, I think, to El Peño and Guatape earlier in the week, and I'm loving seeing all these different sides of the city through the few days I've been here. This is my photo from up top of El Peño. I was a little bit out of breath by the time I got there. Other people will be better, I'm sure. But this is the real Jason you're getting today. But I wanted to kind of explain a little bit about why I'm here. As was mentioned, I am a local leader for IXDA London, and I've been a designer for 20 years. I call myself lots of other things, but generally, I'm still a designer. I run an independent consultancy called Resonant Design Innovation, and I'm also part of a network of creative and design talent called the Group of Humans that's been running about 1 year and growing across the world. The last time I did a version of this talk, I was at the Joint Futures Conference in Helsinki, and I'd been to Helsinki before. It was a little bit wetter, but a lot warmer. The first time I was in Helsinki, I went out to Suomenlinna on a ferry, and you have these ferries. You guys are probably not familiar with ice, but at Helsinki they have seas that are frozen, and you have these boats that kind of crush through the ice. And as I was reflecting on doing my talk in Helsinki again, I was thinking back to how this ice was crushed and how, as a community, we come together and then we disperse again out to our homes and out to our jobs. And we're all sort of unique in the way that we come across, and we have a lot of diversity of thought and mindsets, behavior and attitudes. And I think about all the ways I've changed, consciously and unconsciously over the years. And I'd like to plant some ice-related metaphors, some moment prisons, which we'll hear about later in the week, related to what I'm talking about today. And as is the problem with metaphors, you can take them a bit too far, but just bear with me, I hope they help. I'm going to be talking about water and its reflective and refreshing properties. I'm going to be talking about icicles and this notion of breadth and depth across many different skills and capability areas. and then talk about snowflakes, the uniqueness and diversity of each and every snowflake, but also the fragility of snowflakes. And you can't have a design conference without a few icebergs. In this case, I'm thinking about what is the stuff that is visible and is more conscious, and the stuff that sits below the surface that's invisible to other people, and maybe even to yourself, you're unconscious. There we go. Pause. So 2 years ago, I was in one of the most beautiful places I've ever been, at the Interaction South America Conference, as it was called then, in Floripa, Brazil. And I was practicing a different talk, walking along the beach. And I was sharing all these photos on Instagram and Facebook, you know, showing off as you do, trying to illustrate what a great time I was having. But the truth was I was having one of the darkest periods of my life. I was kind of mid-breakdown, and some of the people here had to deal with me during this breakdown. I was being quite demanding. But the strength and the love of the community was really great in order to kind of help me through those times. The sunshine helped a lot, the drinking, but the Bahian sentimentality that was brought upon me was incredibly valuable. But yeah, I was having a really bad time. And one of the reasons was I was back in London a couple of weeks earlier, working for a bank. And my client had been going through a review with a management consultancy that begins with an M. And I'd come up, they were having a really hard time because their jobs were on the line. The service was being reviewed, their bosses had brought this company in, and I was on their side, working alongside them, helping to advise them on various things. And I'd come up with a strategy for them that I thought was a good way ahead, but it was a little bit provocative. I don't know if you've been in one of these meetings where you send the materials in advance, but I was asked to do that, like a good 4 or 5 days. Create the materials, send them in advance, the idea being that they've reviewed them by the time you have your 20-minute slot. So I was ready to go in, and I practiced for my 20 minutes to take things through and ready for various questions. And as I was psyching myself up for my slot, the slot kept on getting pushed back. And everyone who was coming out of the meeting room was kind of tearing their hairs out. And I was starting to feel a bit worried. And, you know, it was about an hour and a half later than it should have been. And all my adrenaline and energy was kind of disappearing. I finally entered the Cisco telepresence room. And it was actually only one of my immediate client on this side and several other clients on the other side of Europe. And as I came in, the main sponsor said, "Jason, can you keep it quick?" And I was like, okay, I thought I had 20 minutes. How long have you got? And there was a bit of silence. And he just said, well, just keep it as quick as you can. And there was like a bang on the table. And I was like, oh, okay, this is a different meeting. My back went up. I suddenly felt like I was on the attack almost, or on the defense. Both ways, I just felt like it wasn't going to be a pleasant meeting. So I asked, did you read the materials in advance? Nothing. Who read the materials? Tumbleweed. Just assume we haven't read the materials, Jason. Let's crack on. And I was going, okay, well, I can do this in about 10 minutes. If we just get through it, let me have an opportunity to take you through the things, and we can ask questions at particular points, but let me try to get to the end and get the decisions we need out the end of it. So I went through it, and I got interrupted several times. They didn't like some of the approaches, and I walked out of the meeting with both my client somewhat unhappy, it seemed, and I was happy that I got my message across, but it was a little bit provocative. It hadn't landed quite right. Either way, I was happy because I'd communicated it. So the next day, I was going to the leading design conference in London, and I was watching a talk by Julia Whitney, and she was talking about volunteering your vulnerability. And okay, we got a little bit of a delay there. As as I was just finishing the talk, she was just finishing up, I got an email from my clients. So I'll just blow it up so you can actually see it. I'll try to translate it, but I've got some translations in here through Google Translate, so apologies. I'm sure it's getting better. But I got this email. It felt like I'd been punched in the gut. These words were incredibly painful to me because they're everything I don't stand for and I disagree with. Come on. There we go. So I approached Julia and I told her I needed some help straight afterwards, and she eventually became my coach. And as we got together, I recognized that I needed to look into more about who I was and how that might be different from the way other people were seeing me. And I knew it had to be more than the many titles that I give myself: service design, business consulting, design strategy, etc. I had to look beneath those identity symbols at the top of the titles and into some deeper aspects of my life, my passions, anxieties, and maybe my roots. I need to look into aspects of my personal life, my work life, and my community life. Just bear with me. I'll go my backup device here. For some reason, you can go with the iPhones. For example, there's a lot of things going on in my life. I got young kids, and I was thinking about marrying my now wife, but I was procrastinating over it for a lot of time. I was a frustrated DJ and music producer, and I still had these anxieties built up from when I suffered some racist abuse at the school I used to go to. And I'd been this weird mix of designer, strategist, consultant, UXer, whatever. And I'd also, like some of you here, I'd had an important connection to the community, from being an attendee and a reader to a speaker and a community leader. So one of the first exercises that Julia got me to do was something I did on the plane to Floripa, and over in my sketchbook on a plane, so it's partly why it's a little bit shaky. I mapped my career history on a timeline, starting from where I was then to where I started out at university, mapping the highs and lows through the emotions that I was having and annotating it to why they were there. And it was depressing, but I could pick out certain things that made me happier in my career and things that made me much sadder. She also gave me these radial charts. They were blank charts, and she said, take one and think about your work life, and take another and think about your personal life, and map on particular dimensions that are pertinent to you, and rate yourself on how happy you are with each of those. And if you look at this, you can sense how anxious I am, because I rate myself pretty low on most of those areas. But the things that point out, I was obviously happy with my children and things I was doing on community and things I was doing with my network, but very unhappy with lack of team and maybe my finances and my lack of cooking and those sorts of things. But this exercise was really valuable for me because it helped me really understand myself a bit better. By doing this on paper, it just didn't feel so personal, and I was able to kind of see myself out here, but not in my head. And this was interesting because it basically helped me to see myself differently, and it helped me to focus. So with that, I actually created a strategic framework, very similar to the one that I'd used in the presentation to my client this time. I've obfuscated some of the parts, but I kind of created a vision for myself. I defined some outcomes of what I wanted to achieve in my career, and I defined some principles of how I wanted to come across. Notice this one here, productively provocative rather than just provocative and antagonistic. And this really helped me. I created a whole list of initiatives. I created a plan, including an action item to marry my wife, which made me a lot happier. My finances are still in a bit of a mess, but I've got to be really careful of this quote, right? But I never thought I would ever quote Michael Jackson. But I think it's important as designers, we want to change the world, But sometimes you can't change the world without changing yourself first. So I thought it was really useful to kind of understand like how I was in the way of what I wanted to achieve for others. So for me, Julia's help and those visual tools helped me to reflect and project a future me that I wanted to be. So here we are in 2019. And I've noticed that against a backdrop of challenges in its heyday, we've got some things that we need to be considering. There's an increasing demand for our skills. But what comes with that is an increasing level of hubris around what we can offer for the world and what we can achieve as designers. We confuse each other, let alone the stakeholders we work with our titles and our language, and inconsistencies and infighting. I don't know what it's like here, but certainly in many of the markets I have friends and peers in, it's really hard to hire people, and retaining people for any length of time is getting even harder. And with technology changes, we seem to be swept along with it. Even though we're meant to be defending rights of users and the business and all these things, we seem to we're becoming magpies ourselves to new technology and wanting to try and master it. And what's interesting is that people start to create these things called like career ladders or competency matrices, develop spreadsheets of roles and levels, thinking about behaviors and attitudes and skills. And the thing about them is that if anyone's ever done one of these, they're really, really hard to create. What often happens is they're a part-time effort for some people in an organization, unless you maybe have a design ops team dedicated to it now. And there's suddenly a mad rush to an end of a deadline. And so these things, they start off with great ideas, but people try to get them finished, or they sit unfinished for years. They're also really hard to update. If you want to add a category or kind of add a column or a row, you have to think through all the different cells and all the impacts of that. So changing things is really difficult. And part of the problem with a spreadsheet like this is it has an illusion of exhaustiveness. It makes you think that this covers everything. And when you have something that fits outside it, you're not really sure what to do. And I don't think they're flexible enough a lot of the time for the diversity you need in teams. And when I'm talking about diversity, I'm talking beyond the stuff on the surface, the color of your skin, your sex or gender. I'm talking about the actual sort of like specialist skills that someone might have. They might be valuable for the team, but just aren't going to be listed here. What happens to them when maybe their salary and their bonuses are dependent on what gets written in these? So I've interviewed thousands of designers over the years and reviewed CVs and folios from many of them. And I've worked with many great designers and many mediocre ones. I've helped to grow designers from graduates. I manage and mentor people independently of professional, like in my particular job role, over the years. And I have this great insight for you. We're all different. But like humans, we're all very different each other, right? And like snowflakes, we're all individual, our own individual needs. But like snowflakes, we are somewhat fragile at times. I think designers often are a little bit more anxious than other people in business. And that causes some tension, and because there's a frustration and a passion that exists in the work that we do. And when things don't go our way, we can get very unhappy very quickly. So what's funny about the confusion? I mean, I like Sammy a lot. This is the back of his business card. So what he does when he meets people, based on the discussion, he crosses out different words to highlight them. Come on. Oh, damn, connection lost. Damn. Oh, this could all go wrong. Okay. I think we're all right. I think it's quite funny, but I think he's got some interesting utility to it. You can have a lot of fun with that. We should make a game out of it. You're probably all familiar with the notion of a T-shaped designer, so broad skills, across many different areas and deep in a few. Or Jared Spool popularizing the notion of broken comb people, so there are many more skills and capabilities, but at different levels of confidence. And this is where I think maybe the model of the icicle has taken it a little bit further. There's many, many dimensions of you that will be very different to other people, and many, many different depths to your skill, capability, confidence base. Some people, like Stuart Dean, he's updated this diagram. I haven't got it in here yet, but he kind of created this thing called the UX spectrum and was trying to plot people from kind of being on the research end of things to being on the design things. You could say it's a bit of a false dichotomy, but I think all these different models, they're potentially risky if you take them as read and as perfect, but they can be useful for helping you see yourself. They help you to better decode yourself and see yourself through a different lens. So based on this and some work I was doing previously, I decided to start running workshops using various tools. And in fact, I think the workshop I did in Floripa 2 years ago was my first public one after doing a pilot. So I was inspired by my previous work and inspired by my experiences with my coach. And I had 3 hypotheses. Firstly, I believed that I could help engage designers in their own self-reflection, to help them understand themselves better like I did. I believed that I could gather data from using these tools to help develop better models for the industry, which I could share back to them. And I believed that I could help individual organizations develop their own tailored, bespoke competency models that were suitable for them. So with these 3 hypotheses in mind, I managed to kind of do various design conference workshops, do some corporate workshops, and as more and more people were hearing about this or attending the workshops, people were inviting me to come to places all over the world, which is very nice, but this isn't my day job. This is a side hustle thing that I do for the community. So I was trying to have lots of conversations with people and seeing if they could coach them through running their own workshops in their own organizations. And so what I said to people is like, if you do this, please share with me what you learn and some of the data so I can build these models. And it's really, really interesting. I think Coronado is going to talk a bit about this tomorrow, and he did in his workshop. But he's been using some of these materials, and it fills me with joy that someone could take this and blend it with some other tools and techniques and make real good use of it. I had some of my ex-colleagues kind of like message me going, I'm in a workshop and you keep on getting mentioned. And I was like, oh, Jose's using my stuff. That's cool, which is really nice. But I'm just going to take you through a bit of an overview of the process that I go through in the workshops, just at a high level, and give you an illustration of some of the tools, not all of them. It essentially works in sort of 2 core ways. There's a stage where you use the visual tools to start to kind of look at yourselves through these different lenses. And I have quite a few different tools, maybe too many. But the point is to get a bit of a taste of them, see what kind of helps and works with you, and also to help to kind of get this information up onto a wall where you can kind of see differences amongst people, even within your organization or across others. And the other thing, the specific trick that I'm doing here is to try to prime people with different types of categories, competencies, skills, all these different things that they could consider for the next stage when they start to better define what their shape might be, what the categories are that really should be defining them, how they rate themselves against that, and where they might want to develop themselves or develop others. And off the back of that, you can then pair up supply and demand within an organization. And I'll come back to that in a little while. You can also do some basic and visual analysis, quick heat mapping on some of the data if you want. I don't do too much of that because there are problems in how accurate these things are, because there's a level of humility that comes in when someone's self-scoring. And there's not a consistent established rubric for a lot of these things. But it can be interesting to just look at the patterns. So I'll just give you a bit of a snapshot of some of the frameworks I use. First of all, the weird thing is, when Gyula gave me this, I was planning to do this myself, so I haven't stolen it off her. She's been borrowing stuff back off me, which is nice. But similar to the timeline that I did, it's an exercise you do much quicker, not on a whole flight to Floripa. I get people to just put their dates and particular job titles and describe their level of seniority over that particular period of time. And then map the emotional curve. You know, it's like a customer journey map, I suppose, of like how happy or sad you were, depressed, suicidal you might have been various times. And you can see interesting patterns here with me. You may have seen it before, but my career goes a little bit more erratic as I get older and more experienced, which is a bit unfair, I think, a bit sad. But also, that's obviously because those things are more recent as well, and that has an effect on how you see that information. The next one has got many rubbish names. This one is a terrible name, blob mapping. Someone described it as the UX amoeba and made an online tool out of it. And I was like, okay, whatever. But it's very, very simple. It's a very simple framework. And some of my colleagues from FramFab, LBI, picked it up and adapted it from an adaptive path workshop in 2005. So it probably has the hands of Merholtz or Jesse James Garrett on it. But essentially it was around experience strategy or design strategy, interaction design, user research, and information architecture. It was like four kind of core domains of user experience. And what we did of it, and my colleague Warren Hutchinson sort of led the way on that, was get people to draw their own shape within those frameworks. It's a really weird chart. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it normally, but for some reason, people gravitate to it. So you could do this really quickly. It's a very coarse kind of scoring thing. And you can just kind of like map how strong or confident you feel in each of these areas, and then add arrows to where you want to grow. Now, the important point around this is not how you score yourself compared to someone else, but in a team, you could kind of overlay these things and see where there's major gaps, at least in self-perception. But the interesting thing for me was the conversations you have around it. So you do it, and you say, well, why did you do that? Why did you put yourself there? And that's the interesting part. So I would use this in interviews as well with people, and I would draw my shape, and people would draw theirs. And it was really funny because you would get some people doing like these really tiny ones, and some people doing really big ones, way bigger than me. And there was a Dunning-Kruger effect going on here, because the people doing the small ones are often the people who are incredibly good. And the people doing the really big ones, often very junior and maybe a little bit naive. But it was good because what it enabled me to do is when someone scored themselves really high, I could say, I have not seen any of that stuff in your portfolio or any of your work. Tell me more about that. It gave them an opportunity to illustrate where they were within this framework. And obviously this wasn't exhaustive. So I ended up managing more sort of UI and visual designers and started to kind of extend the categories. But for some reason, I wanted to keep this really bad shape chart. And so I added copywriting. And there's lots of debates around whether it should be copywriting or just writing or whatever. But I thought that was really important. It's important for framing and strategy. It's important for UI copy. I believe it's important for service design. And I'm glad that the content design and content strategy fields are emerging to kind of put more value on the words, not just the pictures. Motion graphics for animation and video, visual language covering aspects of brand identity, style, and kind of more emotive art direction aspects of UI design. And information design, sort of almost like a pairing to information architecture, more the presentation layer of that, structures, typography, layout, data visualization, all sorts. So I hadn't really touched these tools for a long time when I first worked with them. I just kept on using the old ones, didn't really think much of it, they were useful. But a recruitment agency called Vitamin T reached out to me and said, would you want to kind of create a tool with us that extends this and makes it more up to date? And I was like going, maybe, sounds interesting. How much are you going to pay me? Not much. So, but I was interested to kind of explore it with them because they had all the insight of talking to employers and potential employees. So we worked on kind of updating it, and we came up with this kind of structure that put things, and they're very loosely framed, right? The more strategic ends of the spectrum from product strategy and customer experience. We argued over whether service design should be there. I would argue it should. And then the information side of things, which were more content strategy and information architecture, they were keen on making sure that content strategy was represented, and we broke down research into explicitly quantitative and qualitative. And then there was more of an interface layer, and you can argue that interaction design is beyond the interface, but in the context of this and all these other things, we kind of just termed it around there. And what I really hated was just reducing all those other things that I mentioned in the previous chart down to visual design, because there are many different types of visual design that you need to be aware of. Now, it's an interesting online tool. You can check it out. You can just kind of do it and then save a PDF. And the idea was that employers could do it to kind of work out what they wanted, but also the potential candidates could do it, and you could try to better pair them up. You had a sort of a common frame of reference that you could start to work with. What I thought was interesting is I decided to kind of take some of these newer terms that were being used, product designer, service designer, UI/UX designer, UX strategist, and try to think about which of those areas kind of should have had the, where were there kind of major differences? For example, like product designer, I was kind of looking at some of the roles, and there would be a little bit more product strategy, but a lot more visual design. Whereas a service designer would be bigger on the customer experience, maybe less on the interface, but often bigger in the qualitative research. And UI/UX designer, similar to the product designer, but maybe they're doing less product strategy stuff. And so whether this is right or wrong doesn't really matter. It was just a frame of reference that helped to decode and explain differences, because the titles were not doing that themselves. So this is a real test of technology. It really might not work, but this is the largest group of people I would have done this with, and I've tried to do a Spanish version and an English version, and I'll share the results afterwards. I won't be able to kind of, it'll be some sort of acrobatics that I can't perform here today to show you within the presentation. But I'd like you to go to menti.com, which is an online polling tool, and put in the codes 309007 if you want to answer in English. If you want to answer in Spanish, then 482238. So could you go to menti.com and do that for me? And maybe shout if it's not working, and I'll cry, because I tested it twice. We can have a little bit of an awkward silence. So maybe for translation for Portuguese as well, like what are the key disciplines or fields of practice that inform your core practice? I gave some examples earlier, but maybe there are things that are missing. Maybe you want to repeat some of those. Is that working for people? No. Could someone help that person? Someone help there? Hi. Maybe one more minute. It feels longer up here. So usually when I do the workshops, I have a playlist of music that's designed to make it feel less uncomfortable, at least for me. Yeah, you can sing if you want. I'm not going to hum or sing, though. Okay, you can keep doing that, and I'll move on. Ah. It has to be without vocals as well. Maybe this is. So I want to go on longer now. Okay, we can cut that. We've got another one of these in a minute, and we'll bring that back. Thank you. I should have discussed that with you. Thank you. So the next exercise is a really odd one, and this goes one of two ways. People just start just questioning my abilities to do anything in a workshop, or they start challenging the language I'm using or just the general framework. But it's this idea of forced dichotomies, and I alluded to it earlier, but we're probably all familiar with this user experience versus UI kind of dichotomy. Again, something I used in interviews. I would ask that question before it became popular to kind of, go on about this stuff. And it was a little bit of a trick question, but I was interested to see how people described themselves. And if they said they were more UX than UI, I wanted to see evidence of it. So again, it gave them the opportunity to explain why they were more on a deeper level of the practice than just more the user interface level. So I created these different polls, almost like pitching them as sort of false dichotomy. So UX, UI, research and design, strategy, delivery, quant and qual, which is a little bit more separated, pictures versus words. This one's the hardest. I start getting into cultural stereotypes here, but structure versus flow. I haven't read the code of conduct, so I won't go further. Products versus service is always a hard one. But the point here is there's no right answer. But if you plot the boundaries of like how much into those areas you go in your work, and then mark your center of gravity where you're most comfortable, confident in what you do, then that can help you. And you can add arrows to kind of say where you want to widen the boundaries or where you want to shift your center of gravity. And the interesting thing is a little bit of a mental exercise to kind of like go, I've not really thought of it like that, and it's hard to kind of say one thing or another. And that's the point, because it's making you think harder. So, I'm going to come on to things around soft skills, and recently Jared Spool kind of been talking about them as power skills. I'm not sure about that term yet, I haven't decided. But I've got another question. We'll try this again, because that kind of may have worked. We can have some music on, but this time answer the question, what are the qualities you most value in a modern day designer? So not necessarily the skills, like the harder technical skills and practices and domains, but the qualities. We have some music? That's nice. I like this one.
Cuando nada espera, todo pasa. Domingo por la tarde, prende el televisor, cambia el canal, cambia el canal, cambia el canal y nada pasa. Y llega el viejo Richard y dice, porque no armamos una tremenda rumbita.
So if you just do one more and then submit, thank you. Okay, we can go down. Cool, so anyone want to shout out quality that you think was kind of number one? Honesty? Openness? What was that, sorry? Helpfulness? Humbleness, humility, humbleness, sorry. Passion? What? Collaborative, cool. What's that? Empathy. Oh, wow. So Lou wins. This isn't the actual chart, but I'm pretty sure I've done this, I don't know, maybe 12, 14 times, and only twice has it not been the biggest one. And I think that's interesting, but I'm not going to go into my thoughts on empathy today. Just to make the point that I think it's important when we talk about this empathy that we are thinking not just about the users, but the business and other colleagues, stakeholders as well. So back in 2005, I asked a question, what makes a good experience architect? The place I was working at used this term experience architect. And I asked clients and I asked peers, and I asked designers themselves, and I kind of created this list, and I wasn't a good IA at the time, so it's not perfect. I created a prioritized list of different things. I was expecting more skills and domains and other areas, so harder sides of the skill spectrum. But I actually got a lot of stuff around, you see here, team player, empathy for users, business and technology, aspects of communication, as well as conceptual thinking, maybe listening skills, big picture thinking, those sorts of things. And technical understanding or UCD ergonomics knowledge was kind of coming in quite low. And I thought that was really interesting. The things that people were valuing about the teams that I was working with and other people that they'd worked with in the industry were not the things that we were talking about all the time. So I was doing a poster for Euro IA, and because it was a poster, I had to kind of make something that was visually engaging, and people go, "What's that?" before they read it. So I kind of created these weird, tenuous metaphors around like body parts, because I'd called this thing creating the perfect experience architect, a bit tongue-in-cheek. So I used this kind of like different metaphors of body parts, like ears to be kind of a good listener, silver tongue to be quite eloquent in your verbal communication, a balanced brain to talk around that notion of analytical and creative abilities, the heart of gold, the passion for what we do as designers that I've seen decrease as our salaries have increased over the years. The strong backbone to stand up for ideas when we're confident that we know there's truth and good research behind it, and stand up to win the arguments when necessary. And then some really tenuous ones about delivery, safe hands and strong arms and legs. And a really interesting one, the last one, about bifocal eyes. So the ability to think and see forward into the future and the bigger picture, as well as having that anal attention to detail. And when we started to map, we created this framework, and using these 18 criteria, we decided to get multiple people to review different members of the team, and a famous usability guru at the time who we didn't ever work with. And we created these charts, and what was really interesting is obviously they were different. And there was no one that was really strong across all of these areas. And so there was no such thing as a perfect experience architect. It was about a blending of these different types of designers together on the team, or dependent on the problem. So some of those, look at that. So I use this in the workshop still. I would like to revise and refine it, but it's one of the ones I've got strongest amounts of data on. So I will be revisiting this at some point. But I still think it holds true. It hasn't aged as much as other things. So given that I've been a bit vulnerable, I went for a design leader job. And I didn't get it, and I was really upset because I thought on paper I was perfect, and I'd been approached by a kind of mutual connection, and I talked to the MD and everything. And I got ghosted. And I was like, me getting ghosted? Do they not know how loud my voice is? So I wrote about it, but not naming them names. But I was interested. I was interested in like what they considered to be a design leader and what the roles were. So I worked with my friend Martina Hodges-Schell, who was at Pivotal Labs at the time, and we created a basic framework, amongst many other things, that kind of started to look at what are the roles and responsibilities of a design leader these days. What types of activities? So things that were related to vision and strategy, things that were related to the external community, things that were around the internal team and managing and mentoring them, or the quality of the work, the strategic quality or the solution quality, maybe doing things around practice and maybe the operations and methods, design systems, etc. And how maybe you were collaborating with others, other disciplines. And then this interesting one around like, in absence of, some people like say, well, we haven't got enough designers, so we just need to hire more designers. It's more about how you potentially can scale the function, the capability of design within others. So think like design thinking workshops is kind of in that category. And then lastly, advocacy. So how much time are you spending going around the organization, explaining the value of design, the value of the work you're doing, and making sure that people understand that. And it's really interesting because we would get people to, you can ask different questions of this framework, but we were just saying, could you map like how much time you're spending on each of these things? And then pick up to 3 areas where you think the design team should be investing. Not necessarily you, but the design team. And it's really interesting if you do this with the design leaders of a team, and then you ask the same questions to the members of that design team, the individual contributors, and see the mismatch. And often what you see there is that the individual contributors have no idea what the design leaders are doing. It's invisible to them a lot of the time. But it's interesting because all of these different areas, these dimensions, which are, again, imperfect, all of these tools are imperfect, they're things that could be done by an individual contributor anyway, right? These leadership efforts and responsibilities could be done by the whole team. So I started using these in the workshops for design team members as well as leaders. So as part of the workshop, we get people to put the charts up. And in the first workshop I ran with the BBC, I had some feedback afterwards that said I felt really uncomfortable sharing this in front of my team. So from then on, I coded it up, and so they're pseudonymized. So sometimes if there's agreement in the design teams, the design leader might have like a lookup table of the code and the individual, but I don't have that data. So I collected the data, but basically it allows people to be a bit more honest. They'll never be completely honest, but it enables you to look at the data in that way. So, without a doubt, in every session I run, which is why I put these slides in, people will say, but you haven't got this in it. And I go, I know. About 10 years ago, I decided to kind of create a spreadsheet of all the things that I thought were important in my design team. And I had about 70 areas, and they were all mixed levels of abstraction. And I had a kind of framework of your experience level, potential aptitude for particular things, and also maybe where you had an aspiration to grow. And this was mine, and it took like 2 or 3 hours to do, not like these quick charts, 2 or 3 hours. And the people would go, Jason, you've got all these oranges and yellows, like indicating low scores. I was going, yeah. It's like, he's going, yeah, but you're like really experienced. I was going, well, but there's a lot of stuff we're meant to be doing. And I just thought it was really funny. So it comes up again and again. So I decided one day on the tube to start a new list. And I started writing a list and quickly got up to 250 items. And I posted something onto Twitter about it. And someone said, open it up as a Google sheet. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And I put some caveats on it. And then within 3 hours, it got up to 550 things. And I was like, shit, that's a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff that we're expected to do in this industry. One of my ex-colleagues, a guy called Stephen Waller, does this comic strip that's incredibly funny if you can take its tongue-in-cheekness. He's an unhappy designer, can you say, and more on the interactive UI side. Very, very talented, and he creates these comic strips. And this is his design thinking. He's got a great one on empathy, but I decided to take it out. But designers should know how to code. Designers should know how to write. Designers should know business. So what baseline grid are you using on the layout? I need to know that shit, So it's just kind of what the point here is just that if you're doing all these other things, you're not necessarily concentrating on the thing you're meant to be really good at. And so you wonder why other people are challenging you on those things. But it's quite paralyzing, all the things that we're expected to do. And the reality is you need to have a choice. And when you invest in a particular skill area, the other areas that you've invested in previously, they might atrophy, they might decay over time. And that might need to be more conscious rather than unconscious. So throughout the workshop, they go through this and there's a priming that's going on. But people essentially have the ability to think through all these categories, see themselves in different lights, and then craft their own shape. And through the different activities, they have to consider aspects like their business needs and the expectations of the business, as well as thinking about what the industry is influencing them to do, as well as maybe their immediate team, and also their individual passions and interests, and the way they're thinking about themselves. And I get them to then come up with a bunch of categories, somewhere between 6 and 10 categories of things. And they could be harder technical skills or domains, or they could be softer qualities or foundational skills or whatever you want. And try to kind of get it as a form of, if you're going to put something down here, it's what you want to identify with. And then get people to rate themselves against that. And then with a different color skittle, just skittles because people need sugar at that point in the workshop, and also they're cheap counters. And what you can do is distribute 5 points against all of those categories of where you want to grow. And then this other thing that emerged, which was just really nice. I can't remember how it came up. But I was like, oh, okay, take another color and then say, where in each of these categories could you help someone else? How could you help and support, mentor someone else? And so people would get quite creative with these things. Sometimes they'll do this basic bar chart, but they have all these materials. They can create all these star shapes. And it's just interesting because you're getting more tactile. You're seeing yourself. The data, the input is the output. There's something about getting physical with sweets that people like, and I have to tell people that when they eat the sweets, they're taking away points from themselves, and you have to give them wipes because they might get, germs everywhere. But it's really interesting. And then something else that emerged in the workshops was kind of this notion of these areas where you might want to develop and where you could develop others, was being able to create these cards. So I give them index cards of different colors, actually business cards, sorry. One where you might be a mentor, and you write the label of what it might be on one side, and then on the other side, you write how you could help someone or want to be helped. And it's really interesting what people come up with. It's incredibly pragmatic. It's not go on a big training course. It's like, I want to be shadowed by someone and given a bit of mentoring while doing a user research test or something. And what's really interesting if you do this in a team is you can see like supply and demand. So in this example here, you can see all these oranges is visual and UI design, right? And this orange means there's people here who could help others. So they're confident, comfortable in that skill, and only one person who wants help. And on the other side, you can see like strategy and like all those areas which all those people want to get better at strategy, and only a couple of people who could help. And you go, cool, I could sell you some strategy workshops. But I don't. I just say it in tongue-in-cheek. But there's interest there because you can more consciously go outside for the areas in which you can't support inside. So some of the things I do is kind of collect things into a database, and people like Airtable databases. So you can kind of collect the visual charts and cut them up. It's a bit of a pain. And cut things by different job titles and levels and all sorts of things like that. You can do some basic heat mapping. What you're really doing with like some of these from the soft shaping perfect experience architect is maybe looking for the really high scores and the low scores and seeing if that particular person who put that is a good reference point for some of those. And I capture some of these from the cards, these like a spreadsheet of some of these development areas, and you can kind of track these over time and then see if whether someone's potential to help others, it could be translated into an intent. It's all right, I'm not going to be doing questions because I did the other thing, so I'm all right for time, I think. I think I'm all right. I've got 5 minutes, no? I have 55 minutes. What do you think? Sorry. So I just want to kind of close on a few things here. So first of all, beyond my initial hypotheses, I've found that these models can help in a variety of ways, right? They can help to explain the differences, different skills, different types of design, different value offered. And that can help to encourage consistency across an organization. It can help to cast potential talent to the challenges, because you know where someone is, and you know where they want to grow, and you can better fit them to the right projects. You can use it potentially to identify your gaps in where you want to develop, and also where you want to strengthen things and create balance, and where you want to add to culture, not just fit the current culture. You can do it to kind of think about where you're going to strengthen capabilities in your organization, where you're going to kind of learn inside and outside, mentor within, and kind of focus investment for external training. And I think the more important one, really valuable more than anything I've found through this, is that it helps people think about themselves more. That has some risks because people start thinking about themselves, they have decisions around their career. But I've got this kind of thing that's, with those development cards, if you can kind of create an environment where people are helping each other in an organization, could that potentially be an asset to retaining staff, to growing them? Maybe you don't have to keep on giving them salary rises and bonuses to keep them and playing that competitive game. You're building a culture of learning within. So out of some of those benefits, just a few major learnings. So designers really don't spend the time doing this. Some of the feedback I get from the workshops is that I haven't ever spent this much time thinking about myself. That's sad, but hopefully you can go away and do more time thinking about yourself. No matter what I do, the tangible skills still dominate, and that's really unfortunate. even though people recognize that the softer qualities matter more in their work. And there's a potential for those organizations to self-develop within themselves. So my recommendations to you is to think about how you can do this more regularly, or just start doing it. Start just using some of the tools. I've published loads of articles around this. Use them as a visual framing lens. So they're imperfect tools. Just start with something and do it across lots of different competencies, because there's lots of different aspects, and maybe encourage learning within. But I think it's really important that you think about these people are humans in your organization. The designers are very human, a little bit sensitive and passionate, fragile. But also, people are hiding a lot of complexity beneath the surface of the icebergs and wearing various masks. So we need to tread very carefully, because we're not necessarily trained therapists and counselors, and you're going to be going into some of those areas. But I hope that we can find a way to design more human solutions from our design teams and less spreadsheets. So by my book, I've got 2 more minutes, which should be fine. So I'll quickly whiz you through some other things I'm doing. I've read a whole series of Medium posts, an advent calendar, did 1 article a day in December, so there's lots of bad writing, but it's out there, just to help give tools to the community. I'm hoping to distill this into more accessible versions, so I don't have to do lots of calls, and I can go a bit further. So I'm working with the legendary Eva Lotta Lamb. She's visually coaching me and editing a work pack we're going to create. And if you want, you can find out more about that at shapingdesign.net, or just pinging me on Jason Mesut. So these metaphors again, these moment prisons. Think about water as an opportunity to reflect and refresh. Icicles to kind of help you think through the breadth and depth of skills and complexity there, and growth and decay. Snowflakes for the diversity, the uniqueness, and maybe how they form together in a team. And the notion of icebergs with the different levels of visibility and the complexity beneath the surface, both conscious and unconscious. So I saw a talk by Vivian Costello, and just coming back to the narrative at the start, this is a bit of an emotional talk, and I will finish soon, I promise. And this quote really resonated with me, and it resonates with me because of the way I was feeling, the way I tapped into what I really loved in my work. But this notion that you often feel tired, not because you've done too much, but because you've done too little of what sparks a light in you. So I ask you to find your light and what warms you. Whether it's sunshine or fire, we can burn those things that bring us down, or we can use heat to reform. Relight your fire.